Hello, everybody. Welcome into another special edition of the Boiler Express podcast. As always, we're brought to you by Martin Vintage. Use code BXP at checkout for 10% off your order, as well as Blitzboard. Get yourself one of these beautiful Blitzboards behind me. Great tailgate game, party game, around the house game. It's kind of like Yahtzee meets Cornhole meets about 15 other games. It's its own kind of cool, unique thing. So go check them out at Cincy Blitzboards on Twitter. And then also our newest partner, CBB Analytics, College Basketball Analytics. They are a great source for if you're like Frank or even myself, you love getting into some stats, you love seeing how we stack up against the rest of the country. They're a great place to go check out for pretty much any in-depth stat you could think of. Frank was just talking about things like how teams perform off of a made free throw, how they perform off of a made field goal, that kind of thing. So there's very in-depth stats over there. So go check them out. So tonight was going to be a little bit different. I know we've been doing our ranking shows for the last little bit here. We've been trying that out, but we were supposed to do a Iowa Purdue preview tonight. We're supposed to have our buddy Connor from the Inside the Nest podcast, also within the Big Banter Network. But he had some personal issues he had to take care of. So you got just Frank and myself. So we're going to talk a little bit about Iowa Purdue and then get into some of the rankings and then get into the big controversial thing today with college sports. So Iowa Purdue tomorrow night at 7 p.m. on Big Ten Network. KenPom wise, Purdue is sitting at number 2 in KenPom. Iowa's at number 38. So a little bit of edge there, obviously, to Purdue. Offensively, it's a little bit closer. Purdue's the 4th ranked offense per KenPom, and Iowa's at 14. Defensively is the big gap, right? So Purdue's at number 9. Iowa's 113th ranked defense. So could get ugly, but we'll talk more about that here in a minute. So this week for Purdue, as you guys know, we beat Texas Southern pretty handily Tuesday night, 99-67 at home, but fell Friday night at Northwestern in overtime, 88-92. On the week, Edey averaged 25 points and 10 rebounds for the 2 games. Braden Smith averaged 15.5 points, 8 rebounds, 9.5 assists, and 4 turnovers between the 2 games. Iowa had just one game. They beat North Florida on Wednesday, 103-78. Ben Krikke, I don't know if I'm saying that right or not.
Yes.
Okay, so Ben Krikke and Tony Perkins both put up 21 points. Krikke was impressively 11 of 11 from the free throw line. So we're going to have to watch kind of fouling him and playing him a little bit physical. Perkins was 8 from 10 from the field, so he's a very efficient scorer. On the season, Krikke leads them with 18.7 points a game, and Peyton Sanford's actually their second leading scorer, puts up 14.3 points a game and 8.5 rebounds a game. Notables on the season, right now Purdue's 7th in the country at 3-point percentage, shooting 40.9%. Obviously was not the case Friday night. They're 14th in rebounds per game as well, 39.8 rebounds a game. Iowa, some of their impressive stats, they're 2nd in the country in assists to turnover percentage, or ratio, I'm sorry, at 2.2 assists per turnover. And they're 8th in points per game at 90.7, as you might have thought with their higher offensive rating. So, Frank, what kind of notes you have for Iowa Purdue tomorrow?
Well, I think you touched on one of the big things, and that's their lack of turnovers on the season. So in terms of turnover percentage, they're actually 5th in the country. They have the 5th lowest turnover percentage at 11.9%. And that's been an area for Purdue where we haven't actually had a ton of success. That's been turning our opponents over. So I kind of expect that this game will be similar to Northwestern, and that we expect to force very few turnovers. Now, I don't know if we're going to look to do anything differently schematic wise to try to force some turnovers. To be determined on that. But really, as you said, the big gap is between Purdue and Iowa is the defense, with that 113 defensive ranking to Purdue's 9 as it currently sits. It's been bouncing back and forth all day. So that's really the big thing. We do have Purdue is 9th in 3-point percentage. Iowa 65th, so 2 really good 3-point shooting teams. But really, I think the most surprising thing about Iowa so far has been Ben Krikke. I know I certainly didn't expect him to be, quote, the guy for Iowa, but when you think about dominant forwards and dominant fours, we'll say in the Big Ten the last 7 years, Iowa comes to mind. I mean, you talk about Chris Murray, Keegan Murray, and going back as far as Jared Utoff. I mean, that's kind of where they're starting to excel. So not surprising to see. But honestly, this is a game, Russ, that I'm a little nervous about. How will Purdue respond after the upset at Northwestern? And Iowa's a team that historically we get a good lead on, and they're able to kind of press their way and pressure their way back into the game. So really, I expect that, obviously I'm a little biased, but I expect that the guys are going to come out hungry and understanding what it takes to win after being maybe humbled a little bit. And Purdue walks away with a 5-point win would be my prediction. What do you think? What do you think in terms of how this game plays out?
Yeah, so I think that the crucial thing you said there is we're coming off a heartbreaking loss in overtime at Northwestern, and so while history shows that as you've mentioned many times before, I was that team that we get that big lead on, especially at home, and then they find a way to like you just said, press us and get right back in the game in the blink of an eye. I do think we could talk more about this obviously Tuesday night in our pod when we recap a little bit more in depth the Northwestern game. But I think there's some clear differences between like last year's loss at Northwestern and this year's. And one of those being our guard play. So like I said, Iowa is what was it? Top 10. I forget the exact number, but they're top 10 turnover rate, or not turnover rate, sorry, assist to turnover ratio at 2.2. Well, Braden last week, even though he struggled with the turnovers, he was at over 2-to-1 ratio assist to turnovers. So, it's something we've talked about with Braden before. Yes, he turns the ball over a lot, but he also assists the ball a lot. He controls the ball a lot. So his turnovers look worse as far as a per game basis. But when you're talking about a guy that on Friday night played 41 minutes out of 45, you're going to see, how many times did he touch the ball to have that many turnovers? Not many guards control the ball that much.
Yeah, and I think that's just it comes with the territory. So again, thanks to our newest sponsor here, CBBAnalytics.com. I was shocked to learn earlier that Braden is actually in the 99th percentile in all D1 players in assist percentage this season, which is crazy. I mean, I knew that it was good, but I didn't know it was that good. So I think, with a guy who's looking to facilitate and distribute as much as he is, that turnovers are just going to come with the territory. So his assist percentage right now, 40.6. His turnover is about half that. It's about 20, which is right at where it was last season. I mean, so like and again, this is something that happens like even at the highest levels of basketball. The best passers, the guys who are looking to pass the most, also commit the most turnovers. And if he continues to assist at this rate, I honestly am okay with the turnovers, in my opinion. That's something that I think that we can live with if he continues to facilitate the way that he has. But obviously not coming off of his most thrilling game in Northwestern, but I think that he's the type of player who really gets that chip on his shoulder, and we see a whole different side of Braden.
I agree. That's it, Damon. Appreciate the comment there, Damon. You guys are so cool with your exclusive show. Hey, I mean, jump on here, man. Come join us. But yeah, I agree. I think that we do win. I don't think it's one of those where we get a big lead and we trip up. I think it could still stay in double digits. So, with their defense being as porous as what it is, I think that we can get out to a pretty good lead in the first half and actually hang on. Having that happen at Northwestern where I think they were up at one point, like 12 points, 13 points. I don't think these guys want to do that 2 games in a row.
One interesting stylistic thing about Iowa too is that 20%, almost 20% of their shots come from mid-range twos. Now they're not hitting them at a fantastic percentage, just at 38%. But 20% of their shots coming from mid-range twos, that's in the 89th percentile, and that's the shot that, as we know, Purdue's defense invites. So I think a lot of what happens hinges on how well they make those shots this coming Monday. So I'm one thing that has me curious is the fact that Purdue hasn't been pressed nearly as much as they were last season. So to see, have we improved against the press, which is not an area we struggled with a whole lot from a percentage standpoint, but we were pressed a lot last season. So be really curious to see how Iowa comes out and if they try to press like they did last season. I think they pressed something around 35 times. And their ability to get back in the game historically has always given Purdue problems. But Russ, I hope you're right. I hope that we can see a double-digit win, and the Boilermaker fan base isn't so panicked anymore.
Yeah, so speaking of the Boilermaker fan base being panicked, let's get back to kind of more the reason we did this exclusive show, as Damon said, and start talking about some of the rankings. So we're going to do a little bit different this week. Instead of going through all the teams in both the power rankings and the top 25, Frank, I just want you to start at the top of the power rankings for basketball and go down to about 6, 7, 8, whatever you think like a good stopping point is as far as that group of teams go.
Yeah, I will do that. So starting off, number one, probably no surprise, I do have Purdue at number one. Purdue does have the 8th best strength of schedule in college basketball right now. Impressive wins over Gonzaga, Tennessee, Marquette, Xavier, who did just lose a heartbreaker to Houston. But they've got 3 tough tests coming up against Iowa, Alabama, and Arizona. So we're going to learn a lot about that. That's kind of the theme. You're going to hear that a lot tonight. We're going to learn a lot about this team in the coming games. So number 2, I have Wisconsin. And like kind of the theme behind Wisconsin right now is momentum. They lost 2 early ones to Tennessee and Providence, but now they have 2 really impressive wins on their resume with Virginia and Marquette. And both of those games are 2 games that they handled. It wasn't close. So Wisconsin's got a lot of momentum. They're kind of figuring out how to get guys in the right places, and it's really guys outside of who we expected that are really stepping up. So this is kind of a dangerous Wisconsin team, and they have a lot of momentum right now, as I said. Number 3, I have Ohio State at 7-1. They have a really good win over Alabama. They don't have really a bad loss. Their only loss is to Texas A&M. And they have a pretty impressive 10-point win over Minnesota. That's not a score that's indicative of how close that game wasn't, but they've got a lot of momentum as well right now. So here's where things get interesting. A lot of people are high on Illinois, Russ, but I've got Michigan State at 4-3 at number 4. And a lot of that's kind of based on history and what we know this team is capable of. They just haven't quite materialized yet. Again, there's the same theme with some of the other teams here, but they've got, KenPom number 15, Wisconsin up next. And then after that, KenPom 58, Nebraska, who, spoiler alert, got beat pretty badly by Creighton tonight. So they're going to be hungry for another win. So, this week is going to shake up a lot of these power rankings. Number 5, this is kind of where I'm still not convinced by Illinois, but there's no one else to put at number 5 right now. Their best win is against number 63 Rutgers. They have a loss against number 7 Marquette, and outside of that, they haven't played anyone else. So I can't get a pulse on this team. Terrence Shannon is playing the best basketball of his career, though. So for right now, I feel like they belong in that number 5 position. Number 6, I have our upcoming opponent at Iowa. They really don't have a bad loss. They have a pretty good win over Seton Hall, who's currently ranked number 62 in KenPom. It was a 7-point win. But outside of that, they haven't been tested as much. They have 2 big tests coming up against Purdue and Iowa State. Again, we're going to learn a lot about this team, just like every team. Number 7, big jump here for Northwestern, but Northwestern beat Purdue. They played out of their minds. They played way above their kind of season average in terms of offense and defense in that game. And if they can keep that going, I mean, this is a really scary team. So I'll stop there at number 7 and collect your thoughts and see if you disagree with me anywhere.
Yeah, I feel like, I'm going to jump to Illinois first. I feel like Illinois is getting the treatment I gave Creighton last week from you this week. So, it is hard to judge them off of their schedule because, like you said, the only really tough opponent they played was Marquette, and of course that was a loss. But like Creighton, they had Nebraska this week, and they handled them. Illinois got a couple opportunities this week to change your mind. They got Florida Atlantic on Tuesday, and then they got Tennessee on Saturday. Both top 20, actually top 15 opponents as far as the AP goes. So they'll have some good tests to show what they're made of as well, just like the test you talked about with Michigan State. And I can't argue with the Wisconsin, Ohio State picks being up there either because they're both in my top 25. They both moved up, and they've looked really well. They're very hot. So cannot argue with that.
I feel like Wisconsin was a controversial pick last week. Coming off of the dominant win over Marquette, it doesn't seem so crazy now.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see. They're actually up to 12th in my rankings. it'd be interesting to see if they can actually crack the top 25 with some of the national opinions, some of the national pollsters. But yeah, and then I might have put Northwestern above Iowa just because they did beat the best team in the country. I mean, best team in the Big Ten or country, both. So, but yeah, I mean, I think there's a pretty clear, top 5 or so right now. Like you said, you can't really drop Illinois below 5. But then Iowa and Northwestern are going to have the chance to, stake a claim on if they deserve to be higher or not pretty quickly because the schedule's picking up for everybody, as you said. So, any other thoughts on the power rankings? Anybody in the bottom that moved up or moved down a lot?
No, I mean, there was really the big jump was Northwestern. Just they had yet to prove themselves. But no, that was the big thing. And then the Ohio State and Wisconsin kind of being solidified as being in their proper spots, I think was really the big takeaway for me this week in terms of those high ranked teams.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into the top 25 that we put together, that I put together this week. So I did drop Purdue from the number 1 spot in the top 25. I know you kept them up there for the power rankings, but with Arizona still being undefeated, I went ahead and moved them up to number 1. I do think that the Arizona-Purdue matchup could be number 1, number 2 still. It would just be reverse of what we might have expected with Arizona at number 1 and Purdue at number 2. Of course, both teams got to take care of business over the next week and a half or so. But so, like I said, I got Purdue at number 2. Houston, I have at number 3. I moved them up. Baylor, I moved them up to number 4. Kansas at 5. UConn at 6. Marquette at 7. Gonzaga still at 8. North Carolina, I moved them up to number 9, inside the top 10. And I also moved Illinois up to the top 10. I know they're lower on the power rankings, but as far as top 25, that's where I got them. Texas at 11. Wisconsin at 12. I won't go through all the rest, but I did move Ohio State up to 20 because there were a lot of losses this week. I texted the group thread that it was very difficult to try to decide where to put everybody in the top 25 this week because in the top 10 alone, there were 9 losses by top 10 teams this week. Of course, Duke had probably the toughest week, having 2 losses to Arkansas and was it Georgia Tech, I believe, which Georgia Tech also knocked off another top 25 team. Who was that?
Incoming. I'll let you know here. Just 1 second. Georgia Tech. They knocked off Duke. That's right.
Duke. That's right. Okay.
So many upsets with the Kentucky upset. I can't keep track of them all either, Russ.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's a crazy time in college basketball right now because, a lot of teams have taken the Purdue route of let's schedule a really tough non-conference, get our team tested, maybe have a few of those break games where you're playing the Colgates, the Southeast Missouris, whatever, and then you get into the real meat of conference play. So a lot of really good matchups. There's been a lot of really good basketball games. So if you some of those threads out there on YouTube that may or may not have gotten in trouble with posting some games, get out there and check out some of those game replays because there's some really, really good games out there so far this year. So any notes on top 25 teams or teams that are kind of making noise outside the Big Ten for some of our Purdue fans to hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I think just a big win for college basketball in general, and as far as the rankings are concerned, was Kansas's win over UConn. I've seen a lot of noise about Kansas should be back in that number 1 spot, but I'm with you, Russ. I think Arizona deserves it right now. The only kind of knock on them right now is they haven't played the toughest schedule. Not that their schedule has been easy. They have really good wins over Duke and Michigan State. But outside of that, it's been pretty weak. But they have 4 big tests coming up. They have number 15, KenPom, Wisconsin, number 2 in KenPom, Purdue, number 13, Alabama, number 14, Florida Atlantic coming up. So to use the catchphrase of the night, we're going to learn a lot about this team in the next 2 weeks. I'm just so excited to see how all these games play out. Like this is an epic week of college basketball.
Yeah. So supposedly, or I would guess that most people watching this are Purdue fans. If you're tired of college basketball, you don't want to watch a lot of the bowl season, there's going to be a lot of good college basketball over the rest of this month for sure. So with that, though, on the football side, you want to go ahead and start talking about some football, Frank?
Yeah, let's talk about some football.
Yeah, so the big news of the day is Florida State is out of the college football playoff. So there's a lot of debate just within our thread, but also across college football after some of those games went down yesterday. Is what is the committee going to do? Last year and some of the years in the past, it's been pretty clear what the decision should be because of losses. There weren't as many undefeated teams or one-loss teams. Last year, you saw Ohio State, Michigan both make it in, but that was because everybody from fifth on down had two or more losses. This year was not the case. You had probably a case for about 7 different teams that could have been in the top 4, and 3 of those being undefeated, 4 of those being one losses, and a lot of those losses to teams within that top 7. So they ended up deciding to put Michigan at 1, Washington at 2, Texas at 3, Alabama at 4. One of the interesting things too is, you saw on Twitter, there's a lot of people that were putting like 10 different top 4 lists as far as, what teams deserve to be in, what teams they think the college football playoff will put in, what are actually the 4 best teams. And there's a lot of different criteria. You hear it every year at the college basketball March Madness time, talking about criteria, this, strength of schedule. That usually with college football, it's not been that case. Even with the 14 playoff, it's been pretty clear, like I said, what teams should or should not be in. But this was the perfect year for those people that were claiming we need 12 teams, we need 16 teams, we need the FCS 24 team format, which I think that's what we should do. The FCS format. Check out the Division I FCS format. I love that. It gives kind of some of the top teams a bye, but gives you 24 teams in there. And they have around the same amount of teams as the football bowl subdivision. So it's not crazy to think that that's too many teams. But what do you think on what the college football committee did?
I mean, so to touch on one point you made there, Russ, to quote Ken Palm, not to go back to basketball, but just to quote the guy himself, no matter how many teams you expand it out to, there's always going to be whatever number that is, +1 or +2 or +5, who, quote, should have gotten in. So that's a problem that we're never going to solve for. I think there are 2 kind of major areas of uproar, let's say. One being Georgia, being omitted. The other one being Florida State. And I don't think it's too crazy to say that had Florida State made the playoffs, things would have kind of gotten ugly. I mean, for Florida State, they're banged up. They're starting a true freshman quarterback who didn't look great against Louisville. I'm not super high on Louisville. I still think they scraped by against some bad teams this season. But I just think that, had they made it in, it wouldn't have made for entertaining football. And that's ultimately what this is all about. And it's really unfortunate that they're being punished effectively for, their QB1 going down. But really the team here that I struggle with being in the playoffs is Texas. What am I missing here, Russ? Like, why did they hop from what was previously 7th up to that 3rd spot?
Well, have you watched much Texas football this year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I thought they looked very, very impressive in the Big 12 championship game. The first episode we did talking about our rankings, I mentioned that Oklahoma State at that time was the hottest team in the Big 12. They were the only team. It was shortly after Oklahoma did knock off Texas, but then Oklahoma turned around and lost the game themselves. And Oklahoma State just didn't look like they even belonged on the same field as Texas.
Oh, yeah.
And Texas has something that not only nobody this year has, but nobody has in recent memory, and that's a double-digit win at Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
And an Alabama team that ran through the SEC undefeated and beat Georgia, who hadn't lost a game in 700-something days. So that to me is why there was no way the committee could put Alabama in over Texas. And I think ultimately, my theory is that's why Florida State got left out. That I think Florida State, it was pretty easy for the committee, especially based off their rankings last week, to have Florida State in the playoff, and then they win their Power 5 conference championship game, and they get knocked out of the playoff, especially after a team above them loses. Like, that's insane. But to me, that's what the committee was saying. The committee's saying, hey, we think Texas deserves to be in over Alabama, but we also think Alabama deserves to be in. And like you said, at some point you got to say, what's the product going to be when you put it on the field? And that is unfortunate for Florida State because they are in a Power 5 conference. They did beat everybody on their schedule. They also beat an LSU team the first week this season that was ranked in the top 25 and ended the season ranked in the top 25. So, yeah, if you're Florida State and you're the other, 50-something, 60-something guys on that roster and that coaching staff, I wouldn't be surprised if Florida State ends up leaving the ACC over this. Not that it's not the ACC's fault necessarily, but, that's basically the committee saying in part ways that the ACC was just not strong enough. Right? Like if the ACC was strong enough, like, for example, if Alabama's quarterback goes down, right, and they still win the SEC championship game, is there any way the committee leaves them out of the playoff? There's no way.
Yeah, probably not, unfortunately. And is there any validity, in your opinion, to the argument that they're being punished because of injuries?
Oh yes, yeah, without a doubt,
Yeah.
without a doubt. I think that's the two points there is the one that the ACC was just not strong enough. Like you mentioned, Louisville being a team that, they're ranked where they should be, but they did scrape by against a lot of low opponents, and their loss was Pittsburgh. That was a terrible loss.
Terrible loss.
And Kentucky wasn't a great look either to lose to them, but Kentucky is still a bowl game. They're an in-state rival, so that's a little bit of a different situation. But I think it's partially due to the ACC, and then yes, you got to look at the fact that the committee. This was the first weekend and the only weekend of the year that the committee all watches games together, and they sat there and they watched that Louisville Florida State game, and had to think, wow, this Florida State team would get run off the field by some of these other schools, the Alabama.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate reality. And I don't know how much of that game you watched, but it was tough. I mean, I love defense, but that wasn't defense. That was just it's like neither team wanted to win the game. It was just not. I think in like halfway through the first quarter, the announcers had said there was like 1 yard of offense between the first two teams. And that's just not the kind of football you want to see in the playoffs. And it's unfortunate that is the case, right? That it's all about money. It's all about the good games and whatnot, and not, who deserves to be there. But, as I said, there's always going to be that team. But, how can you justify in your eyes the omission of Georgia, who, went undefeated, with the exception of Alabama, who, really struggled this season, but, it's all comes down to wins and losses. We all know that, but, that double-digit home loss to Texas, who was it? One of the Florida teams they looked terrible against early in the season. They really, Auburn choked the game in the Iron Bowl. There's all sorts of abnormalities, I'll say, with this Alabama team. But what's the case for leaving them in and removing Georgia?
Well, I think it comes down to, the fact that when I first, saw the 4-team format and I thought about, how are they going to select these teams? Who should they select? I always thought it was a bad decision to put two teams from the same conference in the playoff if there's only 4 teams in. I get the argument that, one conference could have the 2 best teams in the country, or even 3 of the 4 best teams in the country. I'm not saying that that's not possible. But when you're talking about a season where you only play 12 games and 8 or 9 of those games are decided by the conference, it's hard to sit there and say teams from other conferences are not better than each other. Look at the first year of the playoff. Do you remember what happened the first year of the playoff?
No, not off the top of my head.
There's a team from the Big Ten that supposedly did not belong in the playoff that year, which was Ohio State.
People say that every year, but yeah.
Right, but what does Ohio State do that very first year? They don't belong in, but then they go win the national championship.
Yep.
So you can sit there and make arguments, and you're going to point to the confirmation biases, right? You're going to point to the games like, where Georgia runs TCU out of the building for the national championship game. Go look. Obviously, TCU didn't belong in the playoff. Well, look at every playoff throughout the years. Like the last, 10, 12 years we've been doing the playoff? The majority of games in the college football playoff have been blowouts. There have not been a lot of great games. The great games actually are between teams within the same conference. But I think that the thing always should have been kind of what they did this year. So in a roundabout way, I actually agree with what the committee did. I think the committee should have gone, let's take the 5 power conferences. Let's pick the best team from each of these conferences, and let's say which team does not belong. And if you sit there and you're looking at a piece of paper and you're looking at Michigan, You look at Washington, Florida State, Texas, and Alabama. Florida State is the obvious one that's got to be staying at home.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
sucks for those players and for that coaching staff that went undefeated to have just one player go down and jeopardize that. It does suck, but that's why we need to move to at least an 8-team format, which obviously we're moving to a 12-team format. But I always thought there should be a format that at least includes every Power 5 conference champion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that would be so much simpler, right? If you want to get to the playoffs, win your conference championship. One of our guests, Walter Jordan, talked about, back when he played basketball, that's how you got to the NCAA tournament, right? You had to win your conference. So they talked about, teams being ranked 10th, but not making the big dance because they didn't win. So it makes the path there a lot more, straightforte. And I'm not saying every conference champion is the best team in the conference, but it's gonna get you close. But it's the format that we have now. I mean, there's some ambiguity and there's some just personal bias involved in that. This is who we think the best teams are, and this is who we think are going to make for the best matchups. But so the first two matchups, we have Michigan and Alabama, which I know you probably saw the Michigan players' reaction. They thought they were going to get Florida State. It seemed they were a little they weren't happy to see
scared.
Scared.
Say the word scared. I think that was a huge validation of what the College Football Playoff Committee did. For Michigan to be that upset that they have to play Alabama, that shows that they put the right team in the playoff against Michigan.
And they play. I mean, it was weird. It was this first moment of like, oh crap, and then immediately after it was like, yeah, we're gonna cheer, we're excited. But I think everyone in that room thought they were gonna pull Florida State. And
so
thinking, hey, easy win.
I will say too that to me, the large omission, or not large omission, but one of the omissions that has to be mentioned is still Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
I get that they didn't play in the national or the conference championship game, but you're talking about, what was it, 4 teams with 1 loss for 1 position. Ohio State had the hardest strength of schedule, and they lost to the team that is now number 1 in the college football poll.
Yep.
So the fact that people aren't even talking about Ohio State as an omission, I don't think you can make the argument that they should be in. When you look at Texas, Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia, it is hard to say Ohio State has to be that team in, but they're also a team that has to be in the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
100%.
Yeah, and as we had Eric on our show last week, and he said, that's like, if they beat Michigan, it's Ohio State in the playoffs right now, 100%. So like that's their path to the playoffs. I do, Russ. I don't know if you've noticed this or even realized this, but our graphics department is in here messing around with the background. That's happening, and so I just keep seeing things change and pop up and. So our head of morale is in here messing around with some.
There we go.
I'll stop in and say what's up, boys. I can't get my camera to work, but glad I could be in here and help out today.
What's up?
I keep seeing things change in the background there.
So you've never looked more handsome, Dylan.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I have a face for radio. That's what they say. All right, you guys keep killing it. I'm gonna get out of here. Russ, I thought you were wearing Louisville stuff when I first got in, and I was gonna kick your ass, but I'm glad you're not.
Hey, bring it. Come on. I'll send you my address. Let's go.
Okay. Love you guys. Bye.
Peace.
Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate everything you do. So in terms of, the first 2 matchups, which is the one that gets you most excited, that you think is going to be, a game that goes down to the fourth quarter between the Michigan and Alabama? We have Washington and Texas. Which one of those is the one that gets you most excited?
Honestly, both of them do. I would lean towards Washington, Texas.
Interesting.
It's a 2-3 matchup. I do see a world where, Alabama could get on top of Michigan and it not look pretty. TCU got on top of Michigan pretty good. And, one of the doubts we talked about in our last ranking show was Michigan has not looked like the same team since some of these sanctions have started coming down.
Mm-hmm.
Even before Harbaugh was pulled off the sideline, they still started to struggle. And I think Harbaugh obviously being back on the sideline will help them, but he's not getting back on the sideline for them to go play Illinois, to go play Penn State even. They're playing Alabama, who's one of the top 3 or 4 programs over the last decade in college football. And I think there is a world where that game could get ugly. Texas and Washington, I think you've got, two good offenses to the point that and the defenses aren't, outstanding, right? Like Texas did look great against Oklahoma State, but Oklahoma State still put points up on them. Washington got down to Oregon and had to come back and win that game because they have, Penix Jr. who can get their offense back in the game, and they also have a really, really good running attack. So I'm excited probably most for Washington, Texas.
And
I guess your reaction tells me that maybe that's not the case for you.
Well, I just think that Alabama, Michigan is the kind of historically most hated team in college football against the current most hated team in college football.
That's a good point. Yeah.
The thing is that Alabama has a lot to prove because they are, in my opinion, the most, well, maybe not, but one of the questionable teams. One of the teams that you could probably make an argument, shouldn't be there, and have Georgia in their place. Oh, we got a interesting question here. Is Russ wearing scarlet and gray? It's the second time, Russ. Second time tonight.
Negative.
Yeah.
Negative.
Second time someone's asked about your shirt. We're wearing the wrong color.
Dylan went and got him. Dylan said, "Hey, Eric, check this out."
But yeah, I think Alabama has a lot to play for right now because it's questionable as to whether or not they should be there. And Michigan has a lot to play for. They for their own kind of weird cult-like reasons, they want to
Michigan versus the world or whatever.
Yeah, Michigan versus the world. So that's a game that I can see just them treating it almost like it is the championship. But that being said, it is the playoffs. I don't know, like Washington's a fun team, but like, man, I wish Oregon would have gotten in. They're just so fun. It is we can empathize with the IU fans having to see Michael Penix play for Washington because I'm sure, Russ, you remember when Purdue had two guys transferred from Purdue and started in the SEC, and we got to watch them. Got to watch them play against each other. Yeah. So we understand how that goes, but. Yeah, honestly, in my opinion, I'm more excited about Michigan and Alabama just because I feel like, the entire country wants Michigan to lose right now, and so there's gonna be that factor.
Like you said, the whole country doesn't want Alabama to win, though.
Yeah, so, but I feel like the Alabama is kind of the historically hated team, and Michigan's the newly hated team. So it's the who's the it's like you have the Duke, right? But like I can't think of a basketball equivalent to like the new Duke that everyone hates. Maybe it's Purdue. I don't know. Seeing the Northwestern fans the other night, they definitely seem to not like Purdue a whole lot. So, but yeah, I'm sure they're both going to be really good games. I think the selection committee did a good job in terms of for our entertainment, making sure that the matchups are good. But yeah, who are you rooting for? How about that?
Who am I rooting for? That's a good question. Probably Washington. That's probably who I'd be rooting for. They're obviously going to be in the Big Ten next year. I always root for maybe the longest shot and the underdog. And I think, I would bet when the odds come out of these four teams, and they might already be out, so maybe you can look that up and check it. But I would bet they have the longest odds of the four teams, even though they're the second seeded team. Like you said, Alabama's a historically hated team, but they're also a historically very successful team when it comes to college football playoff and winning championships. Michigan's of course the one seed, and then Texas I think is looking really good. Like if anybody watched them play that Big 12 championship game on Saturday, there was just nothing Oklahoma State could do to stop them. They put up 35 points in the first half. I mean, it was insane.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah, so I mean, Ewers is he's just gotten even better throughout the season. It's funny seeing the Alabama fans that were, before this was all going down, they were talking about, I think, was it you that mentioned in a thread, knowing somebody that's an Alabama fan that was like, oh, everybody hates Alabama. They're not going to put them in the playoff. They're disrespected. Oh, I can't believe this. We got Ohio podcast. Plus, if Washington wins, it stings even more for the Hoosiers due to Penix. That's true. So there's that as well. Well, I don't know if it stings or not, because I know IU fans on Twitter that their profile picture is Penix in a Washington uniform. So if they win, IU fans will claim this as a national championship for them. I promise you that. There will be IU fans out there that will claim that as a win.
I mean, they also claim Larry Bird, right? Because he enrolled for like 12 hours or something.
And even though Bobby Knight almost made him quit the game of basketball, one of the greatest players ever almost quit because of your coach. But yeah, go ahead and claim him.
So,
Yeah.
Russ, to talk about the odds for a second. Worst to best, we'll start with Washington, plus 750. The next we have Texas plus 250.
Yep.
Alabama plus 200. Michigan plus 170. So there's
Really?
a huge gap in those odds there.
So
I
I'm
didn't think it'd
surprised
be that
that
far off.
Yeah, I'm surprised one that Michigan is the odds-on favorite, and you're right. You were saying earlier just a second ago that a lot of people are going to see Michigan Alabama as the national championship game, and that's kind of what they're saying.
So in terms of lines right now, Alabama Michigan over unders 45.5. Michigan's favored by 2, so tight game there in terms of what Vegas thinks. Washington Texas is favored by 4. Over under 65.5, so 20 points more than Alabama Michigan. So that kind of goes right in line with what you talked about into kind of high octane offenses and middle of the road defenses between those two teams. But Russ, I'm with you. I'm in the camp of wanting to root for Washington because I'm same reason I wanted TCU to win it last year. I'm just in the camp of rooting for the team that's not in the mix every year, that kind of has their one out of every 5 they're going to be in the mix, kind of on the peripheral team that like Washington is this year. And yeah, there's a little bit of what Eric said. I want that sting, for the IU fans if he does get there. So to know they had that kind of talent there, and a guy has been talked about for the Heisman conversation, probably won't win it, but has at least been talked about it. And to see him go and play in the national championship has to sting a little bit. So there's a little bit of bias there also.
Yeah, so out of curiosity, do you know what – I know this is kind of a roundabout way to talk about Washington, but you know what Oregon ended the season as far as points against and points for?
Lots of points for. I know that much, but no, I don't know.
Yeah, so they averaged almost 45 points a game, 44.2 points for. Points against, 17.3. So for as many fans that claim the Pac-12 doesn't play defense, I think that's an underrated trait that they have. So Oregon's lowest point total for the year in a game is 31, and that's what Washington held them to. And it was looking like it was going to be less than that if you watched the first half. That Washington looked like they were controlling that game. It was 20-10 at halftime.
Yeah.
So I think that the Washington Texas game could very well hit the under, and maybe by a decent margin. I think it could be a 24-21 game that people are kind of surprised by how low scoring it is. Because, like I said, Washington runs the ball well. And, as we know, running the ball makes the game shorter. Plus the new scoring rules, the unders have hit a lot this year. So,
yeah. So that segues us into our first ever segment of Russ's guaranteed bets. One to take tonight. No, please don't.
There you go. Yeah.
We make no claims.
Yeah.
That's interesting to see that 20-point gap between those two playoff games. That's pretty surprising, honestly, in my opinion. Like something like 10, it wouldn't have surprised me as much, but 20-point over under difference is pretty high. But yeah, so, you make a good point that they did kind of control that Oregon offense that has been dominant all season.
What do you agree with the odds? Is that how you think the playoff kind of plays out, or?
Michigan no one's been able to score a ton of points on Michigan outside of Maryland, right? Maryland and Ohio State. The only really two teams to actually put up a decent amount of points against Michigan. And
Purdue put up 13 on them. That was the highest point of the season.
Up through that point. And there was an interesting correlation there with wasn't that for Harbaugh's first game out? Yeah. So, but no, like when again, I don't have the numbers here in front of me to validate this, but I feel like Alabama doesn't have the most elite of defenses. Like their defense is probably, I would say, top 15, but not top 5. But again, I don't have the numbers in front of me. But so I see that game having a lower over under, but 65.5 with Washington and Texas just seems like a lot. Just seems like a whole lot. Texas does look really good. Washington looks really good offensively too, but I just can't see two teams having this, at this level of football, putting up that many points. But who knows? I mean, who knows? Honestly, we didn't TCU Michigan last year. Wasn't that a really high scoring game as well?
Yes, it was like 51-45
Yeah,
or something
so
like that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, anything could happen. It's more so just the gap between the two at 45 and a half and 65 and a half.
Yeah, and to your point, Alabama, I mean, we talked about what Oregon gave up this year, right? Alabama, points per game given up, 18.3.
Hmm.
So and that's an Alabama team that, as you know, how SEC schedules, that played a Middle Tennessee State game that they put up 7 points, a South Florida that put up 3 points, a Chattanooga that was able to score 10 points on them.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, the Alabama defense is not as vaunted as what it has been in years past.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Michigan's offense has, they look really good against Ohio State, but they've also looked like they are struggling to piece things together against some lesser talented teams for sure. But like I said, this is where you put everything on the line, right? This is where you pull out your trick plays, you do things you've never seen, from a scouting and film standpoint. So, man, I'm excited for these games.
same. So, did you give your official predictions? You think it just holds chalk, Michigan and Washington, and Michigan win it at all, or who's your guaranteed bet, since you wanted to put a guarantee on me?
I don't know. My I mean, and this is not like the don't bet on this. This is just like if you were to twist my arm and make me place a bet, because I would never do such a thing, as you know, Russ. I would probably take Texas -4 in this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like Alabama Michigan could be a 10-point win by either team. And so for that reason, I would stay away from it. But I feel like this is a Texas win. Unfortunately for Washington, we both said was the team that we're cheering for. But that would be the one that I would feel most comfortable with, just with like a gut feeling perspective.
Okay.
What about you?
You're saying Texas to win the semifinal or win it all?
The semifinal, to win it all. Yeah, I'm just gonna stick with Texas. Just because, just because I have no idea who's going to win that Alabama Michigan game. I feel like that's even though it's the 1-4 game, I feel like it's going to be tighter, and then obviously Vegas does too with the tighter line.
I would go ahead and just say, if I was putting money down, just because I'm the kind of person that I want to make money on my bets too. Like, I don't like picking the favorite, and I don't like picking something traditional. I would probably put my money down on Washington to win it all. Because I do think, like I said, yes, Michael Penix Jr. is a Heisman front runner, maybe even the Heisman favorite. But they can run the ball really, really well. They let's see, I think their lead back had over 200 yards against Oregon, I believe. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm reading that wrong. Apologize. I take that back. 152 yards. So yeah, 28 for 152, 2 touchdowns. And I just think that's going to be the way that you win this playoff. I think you're going to have to be able to throw the ball. You're going to have to be able to run the ball. You're going to have to be able to control the line of scrimmage on both sides. I think Michigan does that very well. I think Texas did that very well against Oklahoma State, but I don't know if they're going to be able to keep up with Washington. So I think Washington ends up finding a way to beat Michigan in the national championship game. That's who I would pick.
So maybe we just place a bragging rights bet between the two of us. So I'm taking Texas, you're taking Washington.
Well, that's no fun, because we'll know right after the semifinal, because one of them will be already out of it. So.
Yeah, winner. Well, I mean, just in that game, in that semifinal game, I'm going to go with Texas. You're going to go with Washington, but yeah.
Yeah, but your heart's with Washington, so it's a win-win for you.
For sure. Yeah. Then that's the ability to parse out what my mind says and what my heart says I'm getting better at that. That's why I'm worried about Purdue playing Iowa tomorrow in basketball, and why I was worried about Purdue playing Northwestern in basketball. So.
Yeah. What's give us one other bowl game, and I'll give you a chance to look these up. So look up some of the other bowl games. But what's one other bowl game that you might be watching or trying to watch outside of the college football playoff?
Oh, I'll be watching as many as I can, but pulling up the matches here. Let's see. Let's scroll through. Nah, I don't want to look at them. I'll look at the better ones here. I mean, who picked Oregon and Liberty? That's
Yeah, that one's going to be ugly.
Huh.
I think Florida State, Georgia is going to show why Florida State shouldn't belong in the playoff.
Yeah, that one's also going to be ugly. One that really sticks out to me, Russ, is the Citrus Bowl, Iowa and Tennessee. I think we'll really get a feel for how good Iowa actually is, and that's a team that, like, I feel like they were locked at number 4 in our power rankings all season, because there is no real good reason to move them, right? So we have a comment here. You're going to be watching that Cotton Bowl, from Eric. Yes, yeah, we are. And Eric, if you let us know how you're feeling about that game, that's Ohio State and Missouri. So that one's going to be.
I really think Ohio State could trounce them. Missouri is a team that I have not been that high on. I don't think Missouri's got a lot of great wins on the season, and Ohio State is going to be. They're going to be mad not only that they weren't in the playoff and that they lost to Michigan, but that they aren't even, like I said earlier, they aren't even talked about as a team that got snubbed, which is outrageous to me, because you talk about, that's one thing I love about the College Football Playoff Committee is that they do sit there each week, and especially when it comes to time for the playoff to actually put the teams in the playoff, they sit there and say, okay, let's basically wipe the slates clean and let's pick the best 4 teams. Because if you look at like the AP poll, what happens in the AP poll? It's a rank of winning streaks and just sliding teams up and sliding teams down, right? So like, if there's a team at number 3 and the 1, 2 teams lose, that number 3 team just slides up to number 1 almost every time. And if you look at the playoff, Ohio State was at 6, right? Last week?
Yeah.
Into last week, they dropped to 6 after losing Michigan. Well, 2 teams ahead of them lose. So you would think that they slide right into that 4 spot, but no, they actually slide backwards. A year after they get put in, after losing to Michigan and not being the Big Ten championship, they get put in. Now, again, last year, it was because every team from 5 on down had 2 or more losses. So it was a little bit easier to make that decision. But, I really think that if I was in that playoff committee, I would have put Michigan and Ohio State rematching in one semifinal. And then I would have put Florida State and Washington in the other semifinal is actually how I would have done. I think it's hard to take out any team that went undefeated in a Power 5 conference. And I think if you look at the 1-loss teams, you take the team that had the hardest strength of schedule, that lost to the best team in the country that you're saying is number 1. I think you got to put Ohio State in, but that would have just been me. So.
And so Eric followed up here. It depends on how many of our starters decide to sit out. It sounds like almost half the offense isn't even going to play. Yeah, and that's unfortunate. I mean, well, I guess one point I'll make is that I feel like Ohio State's second string is better than most teams, I'll say, starters. So at least Ohio State has that going for them in that game. And yeah, Russ, I'm not sold on Missouri either. There's a ton of teams actually I'm just not sold on. And matchup that sticks out. 2 teams I'm not sold on is Oregon State and Notre Dame. 2 teams that I'm not convinced they're as good as what their record says or what everyone tends to believe they are. Yeah, looking through that, I think
I think I differ. I'm gonna disagree with you there. I think Oregon State is a much better team than what their record says, and I think Oregon State beats them by double digits. So there's another guarantee for you for the bowl games.
Like we've talked about, everyone wants to talk about Notre Dame's schedule, but they haven't beaten any of the tough teams they played.
Exactly.
Comment here: the Penn State Ole Miss matchup is very interesting. Yeah, I mean, Penn State's another team that has yet to really get a signature win. So that could be an opportunity for them to show that they're not a joke.
Also, what is it with the bowl selection committee and the way that they get selected, that LSU gets another sacrificial lamb from the Big Ten?
Mm-hmm.
They were playing Wisconsin in the ReliaQuest Bowl.
Yep.
Now, not that Wisconsin had a terrible season, not that they're a terrible program, but
it was a big drop off after
Mordecai went down. Yes, they very much struggled, and LSU is their 13th, I think, in the final College Football Committee rankings, 13th, and they're playing a Wisconsin team that has been free falling.
Yeah,
and that could be. I don't think it'll be as ugly unless there's more people sitting out, kind of like what Purdue had last year. But I think it could be pretty close to what we saw in the Citrus Bowl last year.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stick with my original answer, Russ, and that the Citrus Bowl, Iowa and Tennessee. I'm just really curious to see how those 2 teams match up. I mean, Auburn, Maryland's going to be a good one. I think that Maryland could get a taste of reality in that game. We'll see how that goes. But
I'm going to throw another one out there. the Valero Alamo Bowl, one that Purdue fans are familiar with if you've been a fan since the late 90s. But number 14 Arizona, number 12 Oklahoma. Two teams that were probably a little upset they didn't make their conference championship game, but played some really good football this year. Again, depends on who's sitting out, who's going to prepare for the draft or hit the transfer portal. But as far as those two teams were during the season, I think that's a really, really, really good matchup.
Yeah, that's one I kind of glossed over and didn't give a ton of thought to, but I think you're absolutely right. Any others that have you particularly interested that we haven't talked about yet?
No, I'm kind of like you. I'm going to watch as many of these bowl games and these great basketball games coming up as I can.
Clemson, Kentucky is going to be I feel like that's a good even match there. Clemson kind of started off rocky and finished strong, and Kentucky started strong and kind of finished off rocky, but are coming off the win over their arch in-state rival in Louisville. So there's going to be a lot going on there. But yeah,
this is interesting. So our old pal Jeff Brom and Louisville are playing USC in the DirecTV Holiday Bowl. But do you know where that's played?
No idea.
So it's always traditionally been played in San Diego, but it's showing as playing in Petco Park.
Okay.
So that could be kind of interesting to see that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I wonder how Louisville fans feel about that draw. That's an interesting one for sure.
Well, I would pretty much guarantee that you don't see Caleb Williams in that game. Somebody that's looking at being possibly the number one pick overall in the NFL draft. USC's season did not go anywhere near as well as what they might have hoped. So I don't think he's going to risk it against Louisville. And it'll be interesting, too, what happens with Louisville in the transfer portal here coming up. After losing the ACC championship game, are they going to lose some guys? They're losing a lot of starters, too. They're losing both their starting. They have a two-headed monster at running back that they're losing. They're losing Jamari Thrash. They're losing Jack Plummer. They're losing two or three of their offensive linemen. Just they're graduating. So there's a lot of key pieces there offensively for them. But I don't necessarily know that they're high enough draft picks. I don't think Plummer's going to get drafted at all. He might be an undrafted free agent that gets signed, but
man, he lost that game in the most Jack Plummer way possible. And that's all I'll say about that. He just threw it directly to the DB, directly to the DB. Here you go. Yeah, just gave that game away. But it's gonna be an interesting offseason for sure. And the big question for them is, can they sustain this momentum that they've had? They're coming off eight season win, now a 10 win season. Sorry, 8-win season, 10-win season. Can they continue to build on that? The one that's interesting, and Minnesota fans may feel disrespected in the matchup with Bowling Green, but that'll be an interesting game for sure.
The 5-7 team that somehow is going to bowl game feel disrespected. I think
but I feel like 5-7 in the Big Ten is a little different, though. A little bit different. I mean, Minnesota's a good team. They had some bad luck, and Northwestern and Utah. That'll be a good game too. Actually, it'll be a really good one. Yeah. Gosh, I'm excited. I'm excited for all these games, Russ.
Yeah. Basketball and football. There's a lot of good games coming up the rest of this month. So, well, I think that about does it. Unless you got any other thoughts.
No. A lot of good basketball games this week. I know we touched on some of them, but we're really going to learn a lot about all of these Big Ten teams this week in terms of basketball. They a lot of major games coming up for almost every Big Ten team. So. Expect these power rankings to get shaken up pretty substantially for next week.
100%. Appreciate y'all joining us for another special edition of Russ and Frank from the Boiler Express podcast. We'll be seeing you again on Tuesday night on our regularly scheduled programming, and we'll talk a little bit more about Northwestern. We'll be recapping the Iowa game and looking forward to Alabama on Saturday. So we will see y'all Tuesday night.
Thanks for tuning in. Boiler up.